You can recycle Super Duper. I'll be Super Duper today.
Yeah, you like Super Duper too. You don't always like some of the ones that I use. And I wouldn't either if I were you, so I don't blame you for that, but
yeah, some are less Super Duper, but
yeah. Definitely. So a lot of cool stuff going on in UFO news in the last week. We've had a lot of really popular stories, and I want to discuss those. And then Jason just posted a really cool one today, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to tell you about our guest this week, who is a great one. His name is Joseph Fascogna. He actually goes by Pat. So Pat, and he's the lawyer for John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, who were two of the primary witnesses in the Rendlesham Forest. So these are guys who were in the Air Force in the UK at these bases that were leased by the US Air Force, and, saw this UFO. Jim says he actually went up and touched it, and apparently John feels he had some interaction with it as well, but he feels his memory has been screwed up. And he also feels he's suffering some medical issues that may have been a result of this experience. However, the government has said you guys weren't in the Air Force during that time, when certainly they were. Finally, the government admitted that and then says, well, we don't have your medical record, sorry. So really weird story that possibly these records were classified and some crazy stuff. So we're going to talk to their lawyer, who's going to share with us, the struggles he's had getting their records and how odd and mysterious this has been for him and his feelings on the whole thing. So really cool stuff. Wild stuff.
Very cool stuff. Wild and crazy stuff.
Yeah, so I think this is a really important story that's kind of unfolding here. And, of course, we wrote about it last week, and some documents that John Burroughs had found where kind of the UK government kind of agreed and said, they could have had a long exposure to UAP, which is their term for UFO radiation. Very, very loco.
It is. There's so much going on with the story. It continues to change. The details of it, but
ever evolving.
The government and the military's take on things. And I think it just points out that they'd be much better off if instead of lying and continuing to try to keep up with the lies they've created, they can't do it. They're digging a hole, and it keeps coming and biting them in the ass. So, moral of the story is, don't lie, governments. Come on.
Yeah, quit lying, dude.
Come on. Don't be that way.
Come on. You're busting my...
Well, they're getting busted pretty soon because the truth is coming out.
You're busting my cannolis over here. All right, so the news. Let's go over the news because there's lots of cool stuff. And, I haven't been able to fully get briefed on the news from this morning, but you have what appears to be a pretty exciting story from Colorado.
Yeah, there is. And this is something that started developing on Friday. And what we have here is multiple UFOs over Colorado. Breckenridge, actually. And so what's going on here is many people, multiple witnesses, saw 3 UFOs. And these are just, kind of unexciting UFOs. They're just white, bright dots in the sky, which could really be anything. But the interesting thing with these UFOs is they were seen reportedly by potentially hundreds of people, including news reporters and police officers. Now, the police officers say that they are investigating this, and the local NBC affiliate there contacted the FAA, and the FAA, as of Friday, said that they hadn't received any reports of anything unusual in the sky. But the police contacted NORAD, and NORAD said that they didn't detect anything, but they were conducting an investigation as well. So these mysterious aerial objects over Colorado are being investigated by the local sheriff's department as well as NORAD. Now, the most interesting description we have here, I think, comes from the actual news reporter from the NBC affiliate there, because he sat with the camera and observed this object for a long period of time. And the way he describes these objects is pretty fascinating. So, Alejandro, as you know, I mean, when you have like a dot in the sky, that could be anything. And in most cases, especially with something like this that seems to be hovering or not really moving with any great speed in the sky, it could be a mylar balloon, and that would make it appear very bright. So you'd be able to see it. It'd be visible very high up. It could be a weather balloon, many things. But the reporter says he doesn't believe it's a weather balloon, and he doesn't believe it's a drone, and that's another culprit of a lot of these sightings. Mm-hmm. And here's why. Because he says you'd sit there and could watch it for like 15 minutes without, it wouldn't move at all. Not slowly drifting, but completely motionless. And then, and this is his quote, and then you would see a flash of light, and they would take off across the edge of the mountain ridge behind me.
Wow.
So these objects displayed incredible flight capabilities and were seen by hundreds of people, including police officers saw these objects too. So we have really interesting objects, and reportedly these objects or similar objects were also seen in Utah the previous day.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I saw the Utah
the sightings
story
spanning over multiple days. And when the NBC affiliate reported that, the only thing I remembered hearing about Utah the previous day was the fireballs that were reported there.
Right.
But when I looked at the MUFON UFO database, there was actually a witness who reported seeing 3 small objects in the sky, just like this, and the witnesses in Colorado reported seeing these things move into a triangle formation, and then moving into a straight line. So these 3 lines, three objects in a line, and that's what the witness in Utah reported to MUFON, that they saw these 3 objects in a line, just 3 one after another. So pretty interesting, and just hovering in the sky and then zipping off at incredible speed.
Yeah, really weird. The state director in Utah just posted something this morning in Facebook, and she was saying that, this is a developing story that she thinks is really cool, and they have a lot of witnesses, and this is going to be really interesting. So I don't even know if she tied it into the Colorado thing yet, so that's really cool. Really weird. And I've seen similar stuff in Colorado. I used to be a MUFON out there. I was an investigator, and these things were reported a lot. But like you said, hard to determine if they're a balloon or not. But I saw something like this once. One of these things cruising across the sky at a steady pace. Could be a balloon. But then I would see another one once in a while that was kind of zipping around that one. Really weird. They just crossed the sky pretty quickly. And then on another time, and this was really strange, and I think it's important to tell the facts however weird they are. I was with this girl who said she saw UFOs sometimes, she could feel them, and she believed that she was a possible abductee. She had some strange memories that were like this, and sometimes she would say, we should go outside and look for UFOs. And the first time I went over there she said to Skywatch, she's like, we should go outside right now. She said you should come over to Skywatch. I thought we were going to be out there all day, but we were going in and out of the house, and we would only stay outside for 5-10 minutes. And we go out there, and she spotted pretty quickly over off in the distance a white dot. It just stood there. It didn't move at all. It was during the day, and it was the middle of the day, and it was just still. After some time, it faded out. And then a little bit after that, it reappeared, and it was just above the spot it was in before. So it wasn't in the same spot. And then it faded out again. This lasted maybe 10-15 minutes, and that was it. But really weird. I've never figured out what the heck that was.
That is really weird. And, these things, like I said, could be really anything just based on the photographs and the description of their appearance. But it's the description of the movement, how fast these things just shot off, that make them really bizarre.
That is fascinating. A flash of light and then shooting off. That is incredible. And the source is great.
Yeah. So with local PD and at investigating. Hopefully we get some more information about this and they're able to determine more about, where these things were exactly in the sky, their altitude, maybe they were captured on radar. That'd be great.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I mean, there are many times we have stories like this and we hear that certain government bodies are investigating and then we don't hear anything else beyond that. So hopefully that's not the case with this one because it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And now that sheds some more, I think to me, well, I don't know if it does for you, but it even makes this next story even more mysterious. It's one that we covered on Spacing Out, so people can watch Spacing Out or go to our site to see the video. But this is this crazy Hong Kong story that's gone, viral. It's all over the place. You jumped on this, really early. But this is a guy, who's watching BBC TV, and he sees of the Hong Kong protests, it looks yellowish light, come in from the side of the TV screen and then hover in front of the crowd, above the crowd, and then zoom up into the sky at this incredible speed all of a sudden. And I think this video is really weird. Now, we've heard from Ben Hansen and Mark D'Antonio, who both feel that possibly this is a drone and drones can move really fast. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I do absolutely have to agree with them with the drone theory. And again, this is just, based on the available evidence we have, I think there's enough to suggest that that's what it most likely is. We know for a fact that media outlets and probably law enforcement too, but we know media outlets were using drones there and are using drones there to capture aerial footage of the mobs of people there. And we've seen that footage from at least one or two, I believe, of the drones there. And, drones can move like this. And with the perspective of the camera and where the object is, it's difficult to always determine the exact movement of the object. If it's actually zooming up or if it's coming toward the camera, that can play tricks on your eyes a bit there. But as Mark D'Antonio points out, these drones can and do ascend rapidly. And again, how rapidly that is can be affected by the appearance can be affected by the angle of this camera. It can seem to be zooming up a lot faster than it actually is. Yeah. But I think it's a good possibility that this is just a drone.
It's a possibility. There are drones in the area. That makes it really strong. But I'm not sold. I mean, that video, when it shoots up, the camera is at least far enough from the object where it appears like it's shooting up in quite a distance. I mean, the light is small enough. If this is a drone, it's close. It's not close enough to make out the details of the craft. All you can see is a bright light. So it can't be too close. I wouldn't think if you can't make out the details of the craft. And then it shoots up, which has got to be quite a distance. And, to control that, it just, to me, the video itself looks so strange that I'm hoping that Mark D'Antonio will recreate this to demonstrate that it's possible. Because at least right now, I'm not totally convinced.
Well, and that's what needs to be done. I mean, if we get a drone with a camera and test it out and try to recreate this, rapid ascent and see what it looks like from a similar angle, then that could support the possibility that that's what we're seeing in this video.
Yeah. Yeah, great video. Really cool video. This is a neat one. And I don't know, this is kind of funny. This is a story I posted, the same day that this next one, and it's gotten a lot of hits. That's why I want to refer to it. And this is about a Canadian writer who is recalling a UFO sighting. And it got a lot of hits, maybe because your Hong Kong story was getting a lot of hits and this was residual, but it's a lot of hits. And I thought it was a neat story. I didn't think it would get a lot of hits because it's just another UFO sighting. But it's kind of neat. It's this guy who is a contributor to the Innisfail Province newspaper in Canada. He also has written several books. He ran for city council out there. But essentially he's writing this story about how there's a lot of UFO sightings, and it seems to be they're increasing. There's been stories all over the country about UFOs. And he says that I saw my own UFO, a bright triangular object that he saw with his son that took off at a rapid pace through the clouds. And he essentially is saying the UFOs are out there. Now we need to get some pictures, so get your cameras ready kind of thing. So it is kind of, fun to have a reporter out there speaking positively about UFOs. But, of course, these two stories that we've reviewed has also sparked a lot of media to be talking about UFOs, and largely in kind of a pro, that this is a mystery perspective.
Yeah, we are seeing more of that, and I like that. And with the Colorado thing, too, I mean, the news report that NBC did on it was fairly good, mainly because the reporter himself saw it and knew how bizarre it was. Mm-hmm. But still, they had to tag the end of the story with the cheesy guy in the studio saying, well, if you go missing, we'll know why.
That cheese ball.
So it's still there, but as we pointed out, it's getting better. You can't have everything perfect, but we are seeing more of these stories where they are being taken seriously, and that's why it makes it more frustrating when, like last week and other weeks, we have these stories that are huge stories picked up by seemingly every media outlet in the world, and they're just hoaxes.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of which, just to finalize, another one of our big stories from last week is this alien hoax where there's an alien laying there with a gun on its chest. It's laying on a stretcher. Some people did some research. Actually, this guy named Isaac, who is a great researcher who out there, did some work to find out that this was actually part of an airsoft. An airsoft are pellets. It's not paintball, but it's similar to paintball. These guns that shoot these pellets, and these guys go do these war games and stuff. And one of the war games is to recover an alien body. And so this photograph was from this airsoft thing, and this guy, UFO OVNI 2012, who has a YouTube site, posted this, making it seem as though it was an alien recovery, but that was not the case. Interesting enough, this UFO OVNI got a hold of us, commented and emailed us and said, hey, I didn't know it was a hoax. Once I found out, I took it down. So please don't say I'm a hoaxer. However, I'm not prepared to go that far, and the reason being is this guy has a lot of videos that get millions of hits, and they are hoaxed videos, many of them known hoaxed. One of them he gets a lot of hits on is a mermaid video from that documentary that was fiction, and admitted fiction. So, I emailed him that and said, well, what about your other videos, buddy? And so he's just not a trusted source, and I think people need to know that.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many of these YouTube channels out there, and whether or not these people are intentionally participating in hoaxes or not, I mean, they are putting this information out there without, looking at the sources, and you can tell by the titles they use and the descriptions they throw in. Yeah. They are intentionally trying to generate hype and get views. I don't care how much he wants to plead that, I'm just trying to get the information out. No, you're not. That's not the case at all. Mm-hmm. So, shame on you.
Yeah. You've got the Jason McClellan, shame on you. All right, so there's some news stories. Of course, we have more than this, but this is a lot of really good stuff that we've got on our website in this last week. It's been really active, so that's at openminds.tv. And, of course, check out Jason, Maureen, and I on Spacing Out on our YouTube channel. You can also reach that from the website openminds.tv. And you interviewed on Spacing Out one of our speakers for the UFO Congress that I'm really excited about, and this is Jeremy Corbell, someone who the UFO community probably doesn't know too much now, but they will in the future because he has these amazing documentaries, a string of them that he's done that will be coming out, and he'll be premiering a couple of those at the Congress.
Yeah, he's a really talented filmmaker. We've seen some of his work, and just what he does telling a visual story is pretty remarkable in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But, you know, there are a lot of people out there making good documentaries, but Jeremy, I think has done something a little different than many of the other filmmakers. And that is, you know, he's actually spent a lot of time, and I don't know if people will understand this, but the amount of time he's spent physically with the people he's doing these movies about, it's a lot. He spent hours and hours and hours and hours for, you know, years in some cases with these people, documenting some of the work that they're doing. So I think he's got a great insider view. He took the time to not only spend the time with these people and hear their stories, but also then use the connections that he's been able to forge and take their research and do his own additional research with these stories he's doing. And he puts that all together in these documentaries. So I can't wait to see the final product. I think people will be impressed with his work. And because of the time he spent with these people who are considered leading researchers in the field, I think his talk at the UFO Congress is going to be pretty phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. The research is the part that gets me real excited because
Absolutely.
He's not only interviewing these people, he's taking them to what they have to say to task and then going and talking to experts and making some really cool discoveries.
That's right. It's not just a retelling of the same story that a lot of people who have been in this field for a while have heard over and over and over again. You're right. He takes that, he presents that, but then he also, as you said, takes him to task and does additional investigation into the claims. So I really like that.
Yeah, and he's found some stuff that substantiates some stuff that many of us might have thought was kind of out there, but maybe there's more to it. So really cool. Yeah, that's going to be a real exciting one.
Looking forward to it.
Yep. So speaking of exciting, let's listen to UFO Lawyer Pat Frascogna. I am very happy to welcome to the show for the first time, and I think this is I'm really excited about this because this is a unique perspective, someone different talking about Rendlesham, but I'm really curious because I'm not quite sure what all you're going to have to say about it, but I'm sure it's going to be revealing and exciting and a great perspective. But anyway, we have Pat, a.k.a. Joseph Frascogna. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Alonzo. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for getting a hold of me and wanting to talk about this. And you are Jim and James Lawyer, is that correct?
Jim and James. You mean John Burroughs?
Oh, I'm sorry, John Burroughs and James or Jim Penniston.
Jim Penniston.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I've worked with both of them extensively over the last couple of 3 years. Mm-hmm. Correct.
What is your expertise when it comes to law? What area do you usually work in?
Well, it began about 25 years ago as a public defender representing indigent criminal clients, that were charged with felony offenses and so forth. Later, I would, after leaving employment with government, doing that, county governments and so forth, to representing consumers that were harmed by predatory practices by banks, credit card companies, and the like. And then, I guess going back about 4 years ago now, I started getting into some representation of veterans who suffered exotic injuries due to various kinds of radiation and radio frequencies.
Mm-hmm. Is this radiation typically due to something related to their time in the military?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Uh-huh. Now, typically when you work on these sort of cases, do you have trouble getting records?
The vast majority of the time, yes.
Oh, you do? So you're used to having to fight for these records?
These kinds of records, yes.
Mm-hmm. So it's not uncommon, and is this kind of, some unfortunate kind of due to secrecy, typically?
Well, when I initially began specifically with John Burroughs and Jim Penniston on this, I went into it thinking perhaps that it was just left and right hands, not knowing what they were doing, that sort of thing.
Is that usually what it is?
Oftentimes it is in the corporate world. But as time went on, it became more apparent, particularly in their case, that there was something they just didn't want to release. And then being contacted by dozens, and if not hundreds by now, of other veterans who were in different military scenarios, if you will, things had everything from, say, atomic testing in the Pacific or what have you. A pattern emerged where anytime something was being done that was, let's just say, unusual, then anyone injured seemed to have a problem getting their records later on when they wanted them. I think there is a component of negligence without any doubt. Certainly anytime you're talking about government, there is. Just people not getting the job done, not caring or whatever. But it goes beyond that. I think in these cases there's an additional level that of deliberate omission in giving people what they deserve.
So when did Jim, I guess, and John approach you together?
They did.
And what did you think of their story? Had you been into UFOs or given them much thought prior to meeting them? And how did you feel about what they were telling you?
Well, all my life, even from as a boy, I was a member for a while of NICAP, National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomena.
Oh, really? Wow.
And subscribed to their newsletter. But, as I moved into my teens and early 20s and into 30s, I really didn't give much thought to it, other than I was always somewhat interested. I just thought it was something worth taking note of in the field, but I didn't study it per se. But it wasn't until I happened to catch Bill Burns, Pat Frascogna on that show UFO Hunters back in 2008, an episode called Military versus UFOs, that I was exposed for the first time to the Rendlesham Forest incident. And it immediately struck me as something special. It was not just unusual, but perhaps a gateway event into exposing the truth. And ultimately from there, I would seek out John and Jim for a UFO conference that I promoted here, in which I invited them down along with Linda Moulton Howe and Tom Carey of the Roswell incident. And that's when we got to know each other, and everything happened from there.
So, and also for the audience, maybe in your own words, could you summarize the Rendlesham Forest incident as you understand it? What happened?
Well, you can't do it justice to summarize it, but I'll give it a whirl. Over the course of a few nights, December 1980, beginning with Boxing Day, there were lights in the forest. The initial contact was by Ed Kabancic, John Burroughs, and Jim Penniston, who responded as part of the military police team to what initial craft in the forest. And ultimately they would encounter a craft about approximately 10 feet in length, 5 or 6, 7 feet in width, 8 or so feet in height. And that craft, which ultimately took off from the forest floor where it had been sitting, did so silently, and then departed at impossible speeds, I think is what Jim Penniston's words were in regard to that. The next night, then, Colonel Halt, who's a deputy base commander, he got involved because there was a reappearance. Well, there was an appearance of something. This time it was a little bit different. It was a light moving around in the forest that would eventually morph into several lights that would go overhead. And collectively, this is called the Rendlesham Forest incident. And, of course, there's a whole lot more than what I just summarized. But that's basic elements of it.
Right. And so when you, first looked into this, I guess, having looked at the book, there are other controversial possible events that had taken place. For instance, there are claims of the government meeting extraterrestrials and things like this. What do you feel about those claims?
You're probably talking about Larry Warren's claims.
Correct.
I don't know Larry. I've never spoken to him.
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken to many folks involved in the Rendlesham incident. Typically, John Burroughs, for example, when you talk about Larry's claims, he'll just say, I don't have the same, because John was there for both nights, with Colonel Hall and before. John will typically say things like, if it happened the way Larry said, I don't remember that. And he doesn't say it didn't. Going back to what I just said, since I've never talked to Larry and don't know Larry, I really can't pass judgment on what Larry has to say.
Gotcha.
So I personally don't give credence to it like I do John and Jim's side of what happened, those events, because I do know them so well.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to them at length for so many times.
Gotcha. So Jim and John had come to you with that they had medical, currently they have medical problems, right, and that they believed could possibly be related to what happened there in the Rendlesham Forest. Did you agree with that? Did you think, this is a possibility?
Well, given speaking specifically of John in this case, since he has had some of the most pronounced medical issues as a result, and these are issues that began in the days immediately after the incident in 1980, and also having been present in Tucson last year at the Veterans, the VA hospital there after his heart surgery, and speaking to his surgeon who performed the surgery, I asked him point blank if he knew what had caused the particular damage to his heart, and he said he had no idea what could have caused that.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and along with some other things that I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about just because they get more deeply into John's medical file, I would say that what happened to him and others that I've talked to in the know, the injuries that occurred to him were due to a certain type of radiation that is known to be emitted by certain objects when they are operating in the spread of dimensions that they're operating.
Mm-hmm. And
in other words,
mm-hmm.
it's part of their operational. It's part of the culture of the operation of the craft. It's what comes off of it, if you will, electromagnetic ones. And this type of radiation, just a quick schooling for anyone listening that's curious, electromagnetic radiation covers visible light all the way to X-rays and so forth. So when you say radiation, it could be light,
mm-hmm.
but it could also be X-rays. It's an all-inclusive term used that way. But there are certain frequencies within the spectrum that are believed to be necessary for certain craft to be able to operate the way they do. And it is that spectrum, or within that band, that it affects human physiology the way it does, specifically heart tissue.
Mm-hmm. And when you say...
what happened to John.
Okay.
And that's what happened to John.
And are there, for instance, like machines the military would use or that would emit this sort of radiation that you're aware of?
All right, well, that gets into the question, was this a black ops project? I personally do not think it was. At this point, I'm convinced it was something else. It wasn't theirs, meaning it wasn't the Soviets. It wasn't ours. If it was ours, then it was us testing someone else's equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And also you have to remember, if in December of 1980 we had a craft that was doing what this craft did, and there's no doubt in my mind the craft was there and it did what it did.
Mm-hmm.
I know the two of the three principles of the stories too well, and have been with them in too many different settings to question their credibility as far as reporting what they saw. to this day, 34 years subsequent, there's still nothing at an air show near me that operates anything like that thing did.
Yeah. And at least in their regular work, in the military or otherwise, they never came into contact with anything known to have...
no, nothing even close. Nothing
right.
even close.
Right. And so when we're getting into the details of what the craft did, and this is an interesting point, it would be great to hear your perspective as you work closely with both of them. From my understanding and from my own personal interviews of both gentlemen, Penniston had actually, when they came across this bright light, Penniston had approached the object. He actually touched it. This is where, he gave the details and he took notes when he was examining the object, that it was triangular, floating above the ground. He took the notes and pictures and stuff, and then it lifted up and it shot off. However, John stopped and didn't get as close, but from my understanding, John only saw a bright light. He didn't see details of the physical craft. Is that correct?
Well, there is some indication that John may have actually entered the craft.
Entered it?
Yes. John has told me that there was a time during that experience where he sensed that as he described that he was in the middle of a football stadium size room, and he doesn't have the memory quite the same as Jim does.
Mm-hmm.
Jim was doing a walk around of the craft, as you know, and writing notes in his notebook, and wasn't paying so much attention to what John was doing at that time. And John just doesn't have the depth of memory about the incident as Jim does.
Well, and it is interesting where we talked about earlier, and I guess I should mention this, and talked about it. I've talked about it on the show before, but how we did this story about John, and John had revealed that there was a UK document done by the UK Defence Intelligence Group and about UFOs in 2000, and it was released in 2006. And he noticed, and I believe some of this is in the book also, on the Rendlesham Forest that recently came out, that was written by Nick Pope with Jim and John. And he had noticed that they had talked about exposure to UAP, another term for UFOs, radiation, and one of the effects is memory loss and problems with memories. And I know, John has talked all along about believing to have some sort of issue with his memory during this experience.
Okay, well, see, you're hitting on something that is quite interesting, that you were so sharp as to note what you just did, because there is a certain, trying to say how I want to put this, there's certain research, I would say, that's being done on why some humans, I should say, react the way they do to this radiation. In other words, not every human being is affected in the same way, okay? Thus, maybe the genetic makeup, whatever, there's a gene that's a gene, but it just happens to be a gene that allows somebody to come in within a certain radius of these craft when they're operating, where their heart tissue is not affected adversely. Excuse me. Jim Penniston, for the most part, was not affected in the same ways that John was. Yet Jim was quite close to it. And you mentioned the memory loss. That would be another example. If this was a craft, whether it was from somewhere else or it was us operating someone else's craft from somewhere else, there is an important need to know how we can use or put a human operator in these craft without them being injured. Do you follow?
Mm-hmm.
So folks like Jim and John are important because they help in understanding how a human operator could safely operate one of these craft.
So that's some research that they have found is going on?
I without going into details, I will tell you that I strongly believe that there is, yes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, and I mean, yeah, like we noted that this was noticed by the UK, and like you said, and maybe for
and let me add one more thing. Pardon the interruption.
No
this
problem.
This is not so unlike or dissimilar to the examples of trying to find suitable pilots for the military and putting them in the centrifuges, where they spin around and they have so many G-forces. Some people can handle those G-forces better than others.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it's similar to that. Far more sophisticated medically, but it's still the same idea.
Uh-huh. And an example of this, I mean, bringing it to this case, is that, Penniston touched the object, he walked around it for a period of time, doesn't seem to be suffering from the same conditions that Burroughs is. Now, Burroughs, I mean, mostly of what he's conveyed is that, he stopped short, he was very freaked out with this very bright light, but he does now, seem to start to have some memories of possibly entering the craft. And how is he retrieving these? Are they coming back naturally, or has he gone under hypnosis or anything like that?
He has gone under hypnosis before, many years ago. And as far as whether these particular memories you're talking about are the result of that, I cannot remember myself when he told me if they were independent of the hypnotism or not. I just don't recall.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, and then I was going to say, so, unfortunately, they both have memory issues, or especially John during this period of time, so not quite sure what happened, but something did happen. He was out there, and there were other witnesses to this thing, that night. But there also was, and I know this is in the book, they did measure radiation in the area. Is that correct, afterwards?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And who measured that? Go ahead.
I believe that was Colonel Halt's team that did that.
Mm-hmm.
And there were readings higher than normal on the trees where the scuff marks, were, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it is my understanding that that is to be expected, because if something is moving in the manner that such craft move, okay, then there's necessarily going to be some radiation that's going to result. And what I'm trying to say is a craft such as this one that we're talking about here was not performing like a normal aerodynamic craft as we know it. It was performing, call it interdimensionally if you want, but it was not operating in the same space-time all the time. It was operating in a variety of space-times during that time. So when it came in and it was on the forest floor, it was there. However, something to point out, John and Jim both talk about as they got close to the craft, they noticed that. And Jim told me once that he remembers, he said it was hard to explain, but it was like everything was slowing down. The forest himself, everything was slowing down as they got close to it. Well, that's a space-time distortion going on. That's all that is.
Wow, interesting. And
so,
are there other?
Then when the craft took off, same thing occurred.
And when you talk about space-time distortions in that, it's in kind of a space-time flux. Are there other people who have told you this? I mean, do you have other experts that are saying that that's what they believe was going on? Just curious.
The short answer to that is yes. Yes. People that are trained to know such things in science have told me that.
Okay. So, so they have this strange experience. When they came to you, were they already having problems getting their records, or were you the one who sought their records and then ran into the issues?
It's now been several years ago. I can't remember exactly at what point they were as far as their attempts go. But I know that the frustration was already there sufficient to want to invite a lawyer into the mix. So.
And what was the nature of, what they weren't able to retrieve, and what was, being withheld or allegedly lost?
Well, with John, going back to him, since most of the work that I've done in this particular aspect of it has been for his sake. John, because he's had the most critical medical issues, John has been unable to get a complete medical file on himself from the Air Force or anyone else who's the custodian of them since that would have them. He's gotten bits and pieces. You have to understand, when he went into the Air Force, he didn't have any physical issues. Okay? And within I think it was less than a year on another physical after the incident, he had suddenly developed the issues such as the heart problem that he didn't have before. Anything that relates to showing that, we can't seem to get from the government. And to even more incredible is, I'd say it was about 8-9 months ago now, maybe a little longer, the government or the military, whomever you want, one and the same in this case, essentially, was denying that he was even in the Air Force in December of 1980.
Wow.
We finally got that corrected with the help of Senator John McCain's office. But that's the sort of silliness that we've run into with them, trying to basically just repel all the attempts to show anything. Now, one might say, well, why is it a big deal to produce the medical records? Why? Well, because in the minds of those that keep secrets, they don't want to give any substantive help to any kind of, particularly this incident, because it's obviously one that's important. They don't want to be able to John to show that he had no heart problems immediately before, but he did immediately after the incident, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and when it comes to Jim, then is he experiencing health issues then that may be related at all yet?
Jim has been public about some of those. I think insomnia and things such as that, but nothing to the degree of John.
And so, and obviously, of course, John needs help when it comes to finances. I'm sure he's, trying to, and I think I read this, he's trying to, get the VA to help. And of course, if he wasn't in the military during that time, according to the Air Force, that would be an issue, a big one.
It would be. In fact, I believe one of his denials was based in part or essentially on that, with his disability from the VA. Was the fact that they said he wasn't even in during that time. It's ridiculous. It's that, and the thing is, keeping in mind that John's not and Jim's not the only aren't the only veterans out there that have been exposed to something unusual, and not everything that's unusual that has produced an exotic injury is related to something this exotic, certainly. But it's really sad that the Veterans Administration has not taken care of these vets for the sake of keeping something secret.
Well, and have they said that? What has been their excuse? Are they saying the records were just lost, or are they saying that they are classified?
We know that John's records are classified pursuant to a letter by John McCain.
Wow.
That said that they were. And initially, going back to talking to as many vets as I have, initially kind of thought that maybe that was a unique case, but now we find that it's really not. Just about any vet, it seems, that was involved in something unusual that they just don't want to talk about finds their records classified or otherwise disappeared or gone or whatever. So.
Well, and I know, I'd imagine, and this just keeps reminding me of Area 51, which is just, it's so tragic because in Area 51, there were the guys who were told to burn the chemicals. They got sick, and they needed those records to show the doctors, what they might have been burning to help them. And they never got them. Secrecy won. And so these people's health was, they're secondary to the secrets. And that's what gets frustrating, especially because I'm sure the doctors would like to know the nature of what happened to John in order to help him.
Oh, we got a letter from one of John's civilian doctors who's asked or makes that point, just as you did, that he would like to see the complete military medical file of John to properly treat the man. So, yes.
Well, and it's very telling, of course, that John would have some records classified, and I think that's what makes this all so important and interesting because, is there any other project or that John was involved with that was classified that would justify, any sort of classification of medical records other than this incident with the UFO?
This is the only one that I know of. This is the only one.
So it's almost saying, this UFO thing is classified.
Yep, absolutely. It's the same old thing that you see. Whether it's the boomerang-shaped craft the size of 3 shopping centers that went over Phoenix back in, was it 97? It's the same old thing. Nobody, or the saucer object that was over O'Hare, was it in 2006 in Chicago or 8, somewhere in there? Nobody in officialdom ever seems to want to comment, or if they do, it gets down to the absurd where it was a weather balloon, it was a weather phenomenon. They love weather. It's always something related to that, and they just ignore it. Figuring, I guess, that most people won't pay it attention if officialdom doesn't. So,
what's most upsetting, though, of course, in a situation like this, is someone's health is at stake.
I know it's pretty chilling when I finally came to the real. I knew from my legal career that when it came to money, American corporations, there are many of them, too many of them out there that will clean your wallet out. They don't care. Just, I had no idea, though, that mindset could carry over to our own government when it came to people's lives, and particularly people that had served in the military.
Right.
Talk about chilling. That was really, that I still find that not just abhorrent, but I find it absolutely frightening. But that's the world we're living in right now.
Have you ever ran across a case like this?
That's actually a good question. I've run across some similar UFO type cases, involving police officers and involving former military that had gone back to the civilian. But none that had all the elements quite as perfectly as this. No.
Well, and even in your professional life, have you ran across, even UFO related or not, this sort of stonewalling?
Yes. Well, not by the government. No, not by the government.
Really? So, in your other cases where you've helped people in this sort of area, you've always been eventually able to get records from the government?
Well, if you couldn't get records, eventually you get satisfaction, if you will. For example, what would satisfaction be in this case? They give John disability and say, look, we're not going to tell you what happened to you, but we're going to take care of you, and that's that.
And how likely do you think that it could be that happens?
I think there is a good chance it's going to happen. But I also think they play a game of they take a long time to do it because they're just running the clock out for people. And They figure that, so many folks will just go ahead and die off and they won't have to deal with it. But in
See,
his
that's
case,
really sad. And then, of course, with the recent VA issues, I live out here in Arizona, so kind of the epicenter of all of that. But that is just tragic that, of course, that these people would have that sort of attitude towards veterans. To let them die off, people that should be honored for, the sacrifices they've made.
I find it repugnant that there are so many politicians, and I'm not thinking of any one in particular right now when I say this, just in general, that'll drape the flag around themselves in support of veterans. And then when it gets down to this kind of thing, evidently they're not doing anything about it. And it's beyond sad to think that this is what's happening.
So were you satisfied? It sounds like Senator McCain's office did helped quite a bit.
Senator McCain's office has been beyond helpful. They have taken what I believe, I used to work in Washington for a congressman from California years ago. The folks there have done a wonderful job in expressing sincere concern and attempting to see this taken care of for John, his disability claim and so forth. I think the problem is they face a behemoth of a bureaucracy that they don't necessarily control either, and they have to operate within certain guidelines there, or rather constraints as far as getting things done. But they have done a wonderful job in helping thus far.
What are their views? I mean, what do they make of this whole thing?
That there's something to Rendlesham that is important enough to screw around with somebody like John. That's basically what they would say.
Wow. And do you know if McCain himself is aware of the situation?
I have not spoken to the senator myself personally. John has, and according to John, yes, he is.
Wow, it would be so interesting to know how he feels about the situation.
I'm sure he finds it as repulsive as anyone else. But again, he can only do so much, even as a sitting U.S. senator. But I think he's doing all that he can.
So it's really impressive, I think, that and that John has gone on his own. And I know he feels a little bit left out on his own. He's expressed, kind of some disappointment with that he hasn't had help from other Rendlesham researchers, but that he's gone out to seek all of these records and information, and it sounds like he's doing an excellent job.
Oh, I think he is. I wish more people were like him. He's the type of person that's going to make sure justice is done. So,
yeah. I mean, that was pretty impressive. I mean, I think it's pretty revealing that section on the UAP radiation he found in that declassified document. What was it like? How did you react when he showed that to you?
Oh, it was wonderful. I think it also, that particular document appears to me to have been written in such a way as to try to explain Rendlesham away, using the ball lightning and so forth.
Right.
But I think there are elements of absolute truth in there as far as the effects. And I'll put it this way, I think that was written with the Rendlesham case in mind. Much of that, certainly that one page that I think you're probably talking about primarily.
Right.
And of course, they reference Rendlesham as well, and that wasn't just by happenstance. I think that's because that was the incident the author was thinking of the whole time he was writing it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and this is, getting to the book, there are, and just your feelings, and if you've seen kind of some of this controversy, there's a lot of controversy around Nick Pope. I've spent a lot of time with him. I've interviewed him quite a bit. I think he's been really helpful to this field and pushing forward, to get out information on the topic. But of course, he worked for the Ministry of Defense. It makes it, and he's mentioned this at times, a little difficult working on this book because he is still under the Secrecy Act, and they're in the UK, and he did have the book kind of looked at by the MOD to make sure he wasn't talking about anything he shouldn't be. And, of course, then people have been questioning that, and some researchers in particular have said that they feel he scrubbed the book a bit and isn't being totally forthcoming. Have you seen that at all, at least in what Jim and John have been working on? Do you feel that any of their information or your work was suppressed at all in the book?
No. I mean, the four of us talked on more occasions than I can count during the time the book was being written. Sometimes as frequently as once a week, we would conference call to discuss the chapters and so forth. Anything that Nick, I don't think scrub would be the right word.
Mm-hmm.
I think Nick, if he did anything in that regard, it was the way he phrased it, just because he wanted to make sure he was not doing anything he shouldn't under any prior mandates that he had. I don't know, but as far as keeping anything out, no, I don't think so. I wouldn't buy into that.
So it sounds like have no reservations about the book, and you do not feel that with your involvement that you saw anything of that sort.
No.
So, are you personally very satisfied with the book and how it represents at least what you've worked on?
Well, the short answer, yes, because the goal was to get the book out there with John and Jim's names on it, because previously they had not done that,
mm-hmm.
and to put something down that would, talk in their words what had happened, and I think it was important to do that. And so, in that regard, yes, I'm quite pleased with it.
Mm-hmm. And have you, what's it been like for you working on this? I guess you've been interested in UFOs for quite some time. It sounds like you have facilitated events around UFOs. So I guess your family and colleagues probably weren't too surprised you were working on a case like this.
Well, no, not necessarily. Again, remember I said I've always had an interest, but it really was not a public interest.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed, though, since I've been involved in this, that I now get labeled as a certain kind of UFO guy or UFO lawyer or what have you.
Oh, really?
And that doesn't really bother me because, as you probably well know, the vast majority of people that discount the possibility of UFOs being aliens don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
They don't know. They couldn't tell you one detail. They couldn't of any great case, but they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But as you get into it and you start to read and listen with an open mind, then you start to understand that you can't just discount this stuff as being, weather phenomena or what have you. So, and of course, something that Tom Carey told me once was, you're not really in this field until somebody turns their back on you because you are in this field and they think you're crazy.
Uh-huh.
And I've now had that happen. But
really?
I kind of wear it as a badge of honor, and I think, hey,
yeah,
that's cool. You can believe whatever you want. I'm going to believe what I believe because I'm giving it a chance. You're not.
Yeah.
So it's okay.
Do you think it's hurt you at all professionally?
I don't care if it has, to be honest with you. Maybe it has.
Uh-huh.
But I kind of look at it as John and Jim and I were meant to join forces as we have, and I'm just going to follow what the universe has laid out for me.
Yeah.
Trust in it.
Well, have you had those situations where colleagues who were skeptical took a look at the book and said, wow,
Oh, yeah, of course.
Uh-huh.
Of course. The typical reaction is, well, I never realized that all this happened, because I never realized it was this in-depth, or people like these people were involved in such a thing.
Right.
Certainly when you talk about pilots, police, and military personnel, the average person is going to listen a little bit more intently.
Mm-hmm. Right, and Rendlesham's an important case. I mean, Nick Pope likes to say often that it's the most important case, possibly more important than Roswell, probably because, so many of the witnesses are living and forthcoming. Do you feel the same way?
I do, in the sense that Roswell, of course, is Roswell and always will be. It's a standalone standard by which to compare cases, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Nick is correct, though. I'm not sure if there's even one surviving witness now. I can't recall, but there were up until well within the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it's now kind of gotten pushed back so far on the timeline. Rendlesham is a lot of, just based on what you see on cable TV UFO shows today, you seldomly see Roswell compared to Rendlesham.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see Rendlesham 3 or 4 to 1 to Roswell stories, and that kind of tells you right there what's more popular.
Yep. But Rendlesham being, of course, really important. And then, I should ask, because another great witness, of course, is Colonel Halt, who was a deputy base commander. And have you had much interaction with him?
I have unfortunately, never had the opportunity to speak with the colonel.
Mm-hmm.
I take that back. I have exchanged emails, but I've never spoken to him personally.
Mm-hmm.
Never spoken to him personally.
I know he's very cautious, no doubt, when he about
he
who.
Is.
Mm-hmm.
He is.
Which is understandable, I would think, too.
He is.
Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Major General Gordon Williams. He was very, very nice man. Met him last year.
And who was he again? I'm sorry, I've forgotten.
Gordon Williams was, I think at that time, he was already head of the Air Force, NATO in that part of their area. I can't remember his exact title. Now that you asked me, it's on the tip of my tongue. But he was over Bentwaters, let's put it that way, and Colonel Halt reported to him, I believe, routinely, or at least in this instance, he did. The general was very much aware of everything, but the general is also very, very tight-lipped, I'll say that. Mm-hmm. But a prince of a gentleman. Nice guy.
Did he share with you his thoughts on the whole UFO incident?
Only to the extent that when he was through, I didn't know if he was a believer or not.
So some of that rhetoric, administrative, bureaucratic kind of double talk.
He didn't discount it, and he did not. He didn't say anything in support of it. So.
Yeah, funny. So going forward, so you're still fighting to get the disability for both gentlemen?
Just John right now.
Okay.
Just John.
And hopefully that will happen. And as far as you feel, what can the person out there who feels for John do something to help that?
It's never, and I want to emphasize that because this is one of the things that drew me into helping these two gentlemen. It's never been about money. And it's always been about the pursuit of the truth about what happened to them. And now in John's case, because of the severity of the issues, getting his disability from the government for the injuries sustained there. I think the best thing would be to go on the Justice for Bentwaters website or through Facebook, what have you, just to drop John a note and say you support him. That means an awful lot to both gentlemen. It really does.
And that website's Justice for Bentwaters.
I believe it's Justice for Bentwaters. If you just go and put Bentwaters, Rendlesham, you're going to come up with a variety of sites, and John Burroughs is attached to that, Facebook, and so forth. So finding them is not hard to do.
Uh-huh. So just some feedback. I know, he's a lot on a lot of the networks. On Facebook I am, especially lately, he's been doing a lot of commenting and talking out there, which is great to hear from him. And I know there is a Rendlesham Forest incident page out there as well.
Yes, I believe
that
so.
People can go check out that they monitor. So just giving some words of support is helpful.
It really is. That's a lot of the fuel that keeps them going.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things I admire the most about it.
And how has this case affected you? Is your life different? Has it given you kind of a new mission to help out with this in this field, or how does it affected you?
Well, certainly it's opened my eyes to a lot of things that are going on that I never even thought about could be going on, and I don't just mean alien presence. I mean the way our government is actually handling things.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was a World War II veteran, and so I've always had a lot of respect for those men and women that served. It also it kind of keeps me looking to the sky a little bit more than I ever did before. Just knowing that there are things going on that are beyond our normal everyday experiences, and every now and then someone like John Burroughs or Jim Penniston encounters him in a forest. So
yeah,
it's real.
Have you yourself had a sighting?
No, not particularly, I could say. I mean, there have been times that many of us have. We wonder when we're driving home one night from somewhere what a light is. It doesn't look like a plane, but nothing that comes anywhere close to this.
Mm-hmm. Wow. But now that you're looking up more, hopefully you'll have your own incredible sighting.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been so terribly interesting. And it's great to hear from you, and it's great that you're doing this work. I mean, this is really important stuff, and I think this story in this case is really important. I mean, just by the government withholding this information is confirmation that something happened, right?
I used to think that maybe not, that they're just keeping secrets of military hardware and so forth. I'm now at the point where I realize that it's not all explained away by that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That it makes far more sense that something is going on. It reminds me of a quote by Dr. Jeff Meldrum, Idaho State University anthropologist who's a prominent figure in Bigfoot world.
Right.
And I heard him once say that it seems to him more likely that there is an unknown bipedal ape walking around in the woods up there than it is that there isn't.
Uh-huh.
That explains things a little bit better. And I kind of feel the same way about this field. I think it makes more sense that something from outside of Earth is going on than it does to explain it away with all the other things that we've been trying to explain it away by.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know a lot of the listeners here will agree with you wholeheartedly. So, and do you have is there another website you would recommend people to go to, or just go check out the book, and check out the Justice for Rendlesham?
That's what I would do, and I would let the guys know that you're with them, you believe in what they're doing, and good luck. Wish them luck.
All right. Great. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to Pat for joining us. Really interesting stuff. I mean, this is a really cool developing story. So we'll be keeping up with John Burroughs. We'll have him on the show soon to get his perspective on all of this. And, of course, you could read our story about John and his findings at openminds.tv. You can also read more about this in the Rendlesham book that they wrote, that Jim and James wrote, or John and Jim wrote with Nick Pope about the Rendlesham Forest with information that Pat had also, given to them or worked on. So all of this is in the book. The book doesn't really chronicle all of John's research in all of this, but it does have a section that covers some of it. We covered a little more in our story on this, and then we'll be talking to John to get even more. And of course, Pat then gave us a lot more of the story. But amazing story that really has to get out there, and this may be the one. One of the new cases that really pins the government down to show that there's somewhat of a cover-up going on of some sort of who knows. So we need to find that out. So this is great stuff. So thank you so much to Pat. Don't forget to check out our video portal on our website. And this is a page you can go to where you don't have to buy the DVDs anymore of all of our lectures from the UFO Congress. You can now go to this site and for a few bucks a month join and go and watch all the videos you want whenever you want, or just pay a couple bucks to watch one individual video if that's what you want to do. We have a dozen or so videos up there now, but we're adding more every month. And when we're done, we're going to have dozens and dozens and dozens of videos up there. So a lot of incredible lectures from the past and that you're going to be able to see. And it's research that is really important that hopefully does not get lost, over time. And people like Frances Barwood, who was the city councilwoman in Phoenix during the Phoenix Lights, and she hasn't spoken very much. Not a lot of people have gotten to hear her full story, and I think it's the most incredible story when it comes to the Phoenix Lights, because she interviewed thousands of witnesses and brought that to the city council to get them to do something, and ran into a lot of problems. And then we also have people, because unfortunately over time people pass. One of those people is Lloyd Pye, has passed away. He did research on the Star Child skull, but you'll be able to see one of his last lectures if you go to our video portal. So we have a lot of cool stuff there. And speaking of awesome UFO Congress talks, you can see them live this February, the 18th to the 22nd. You can register for the UFO Congress. You need to get in there. There's still rooms available in the host conference hotel. Those book up quick. I doubt that we'll have any. That will probably get booked up within the next month. Even though we're months out, it gets booked up quick. So if you want to be in the host hotel, you got to get your room quick, and you got to register really quick. Otherwise, if you don't get in the host hotel, there are nearby hotels you can stay at, so no problem. But you definitely want to check out this year's conference. It's going to be huge. We have a lot of incredible stuff. We have a lot of great speakers. We've got Jeremy, like we talked about, but I keep talking about the Allagash guys. I mean, I was hanging out with Travis Walton this weekend at a camp out, and I keep telling people that this Allagash abduction case that will be featured at our conference is just as important as his case. And one of the reasons is because the witnesses are so down to earth, regular guys, and getting to meet and talk to them is an experience. And just like with Travis Walton's case, because really meeting Travis Walton is one of the most convincing things when it comes to that case, because he's just such a down to earth guy, and you really feel for him or when he talks about the story. So that's going to be a really exciting one. So definitely go to ufocongress.com or openminds.tv to see more about that. You'll want to check out our Spacing Out, where we talk about Hong Kong, and see the interview that Jason did with Jeremy Corbell. So a lot of cool stuff, as usual, at openminds.tv that you got to check out. And, of course, MUFON sightings, written by Roger Marsh every